Hello and welcome back to today's episode of the podcast. Let's jump right in. So today on the podcast we have a very special guest, and that is Sorensen. Soren Sorensen is a educator as well as a documentary filmmaker, and on this episode of the podcast I interview him about his most recent project, Omar Sosa's 88 well-tuned drums, now available for streaming on Amazon Prime. So definitely go give it a watch. We talk a bit about his process as a documentary filmmaker, the project's conception and its production, as well as the post-production. Also just wanted to take the time to say to anyone who has listened to this podcast up until this point, I appreciate it so much. I had really fun doing this, and I also just wanted to say thank you to my guests. I was so lucky to have been able to interview a guest for every episode, because honestly that's the reason why I like to listen to podcasts, is to learn a bit about people's lives and their perspectives. This just so happens to be within the confines of filmmaking and like artistry, but nonetheless, yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more episodes. Thanks for listening.
I'm Soren Sorensen, and I'm an associate teaching professor in the Department of Visual and Performing Arts at Clark University. I'm a filmmaker, almost exclusively documentaries, or I guess exclusively documentaries. And I got into filmmaking through my undergraduate degree was in film scoring from Berklee College of Music. And I got out of school and I was working at a video store. And I ended up with a production internship in Boston at a now defunct production house called September Productions. Their office is on Columbus Avenue, and I ended up working on a lot of TV commercials, mostly, and I worked on a few movies, maybe 4 or 5, not many, mostly TV commercials, McDonald's, Brinks, NFL Films. I mean, any product you can name, pretty much. So while that was happening, I was doing music for freelance, music projects for the Travel Channel, History Channel, CNN International, like, a bunch of different clients. And I never really, I don't think I ever really found a voice as a composer. It's not to say that I wouldn't have had I continued. But I just was sort of like, I was flailing a little bit, or I was adrift a little bit, and I wasn't really in love with what I was doing. But there was this guy Tom Yarashek, who hired me to do some music. This is 25 years ago now. And Terra Media was the name of the company. He doesn't work there anymore. I think he's at Fidelity now. He still does media, but he works for like an investment bank. But I don't think I'm giving away any secrets here. It's on his LinkedIn profile. But he was making these shows about you know Hooked, illegal drugs and how they got that way, and then the Boston Strangler, and like these kind of sensational History Channel shows, and they weren't bad shows. I mean, they're really cool. And the story I tell myself is that I became more interested in like piecing the show together than like my own contributions to it musically. I don't feel like I was growing as a composer, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to, or I was going to. It's not to say that I didn't keep making music, but I was kind of had that idea that I wasn't going to probably do that for very long, or like move to California and try to be like one of the big 10, like, film composers, or be a copyist or something like that. I just couldn't imagine. So then at the same time, I was like around that time, this is now 23 years ago, I moved to New York with a good friend, Dan Akiba, who's a cinematographer. And he was at City College in New York, studying cinematography for his MFA. And he was making a documentary, a short documentary that I ended up doing music for called My Brother's Wedding, which was about his ultra Orthodox Jewish brother. Well, his brother essentially converting to ultra Orthodox Judaism in Israel. Him and his secular Jewish family from Brookline going to Israel to go to the wedding, essentially. And I was, I mean, at that point I was like really in love with this idea of like making a film about or doing some sort of like journalism about my own family. And ended up, being a long trajectory. But I made a film about my dad that I started shooting, and we started shooting in 2006, and it didn't come out till 2016. It takes me 10 years to make a movie, pretty much. And then the Omar Sosa's 88 well-tuned drums took even more than 10 years. So, from the first shoot to it actually being delivered and out in the world. So, I would say non-traditional. I mean, I didn't go to film school. I'm not into cameras at all. I'm a filmmaker that cares less about the camera than anybody you'll ever meet, pretty much.
Well, first, the first thing that stood out to me was that you said that you weren't really necessarily in love with like contributing your own art in the form of music, but you really liked that collaborative nature. Would you say that that still applies to you in the world of film? Like you like thrive on that collaborative nature, or is it like other forms of creative expression for you that you love?
I like seeing students collaborate. Most of what I do is pretty solitary. It's not that I don't like working with people. I mean, I work with Jason Rossi a lot. Jay, who you've met before, who did the cinematography workshops in our intro class back at Clark, and still does, and is going to hopefully teach a class in the fall at another school. And I've been working with him now for since I don't know 2012 or something. Like when we connected for the first time, and maybe did a first like freelance video project for a nonprofit or something like that. So I like working with people. I don't know if I think about like if I had all the money in the world, like would I have some big crew and do some big, I don't even think I would. Like I like working small. I like talking to people. I like learning about people's lives. I'm always asking students where they're from and do they like their hometown and what's it like, where their parents like. Like I don't mean to pry, but I'm always like, oh, it's just like people's lives are interesting. I don't know. So
Right.
if you don't have that, I don't know how people make documentaries if they don't actually like connecting with people. I suppose you could make
People.
documentaries about celebrities and stuff, and you're not really, but I like just talking to anybody. I mean, so
So you'd say it's like more like that human connection part, which I think, yeah, I feel like that translates to why you're a documentarian. Um,
yeah, when you do something for long enough that somebody asks you why you do it, and then you're like, I think you're telling yourself a lot of stories. I mean, you have to say it out loud. You have to justify what you're doing in some ways, and then and then you sound like, I mean, I sometimes I hear myself talking, and I'm like, I don't know if that's even true. Like, there's no, it's all subjective
it
anyway.
sounds true to me.
I know it sounds true to me too, but it's also like it also kind of there's something like there are lots of ways to be an artist. There's lots of ways to be a filmmaker. There's lots of ways to be a composer. There's lots of ways to be a painter or a visual artist, whatever medium pick your poison. But like, so I find I try not to like let imposter syndrome creep in or think, okay, well, I should be better at XYZ thing if I'm a filmmaker. I mean, I just don't. I do it. It's more like identity than behavior. Like it's not like I feel like I feel a compulsion to do it, but I don't feel like I'm not trying to prove anything, and I'm not trying to, it doesn't seem like leveling up in the industry is something I'm concerned
Mm,
about because I'm a teacher. So I'm also really careful to remind people that that's my primary source of income. I mean, making documentaries is a money loser essentially. Like I'm not getting rich off of what I'm doing. So,
yeah.
the fact that I work with these fabulous, students and faculty colleagues and staff colleagues. I mean, it's a great job. I mean, so I'm lucky to be able to do what I do.
No, yeah, and I mean, obviously, like I'm lucky to have had you as a professor. Like, I'd say that you're probably one of the most like instrumental like professors I've had in my education, and like, no, yeah, I mean, it goes without saying. Like, I definitely like know that you have the love for it. Not in addition to the talent, which I think is what really stands out to me. I mean, like, I feel like the most effective filmmakers I know personally, not personally, like have the love for it, and that like really shows. Um, but yeah, I kind of wanted to ask you some questions specifically about Omar Sosa's 88 well-tuned drums. My history with it, honestly, going back, I wasn't able to attend the premiere of it at Razzo, so I feel a little bit unplugged in that sense. But when it was released on streaming services, obviously I watched it as soon as I could, and I loved it. It really, really struck a chord with me. And yeah, I feel like you're kind of like you're very even keeled. You're kind of like undercover, and mysterious, and like you're saying that it took you maybe like 5, 10 years to do. And I'm like, while teaching, while having a family, maintaining other relationships, I'm honestly like so blown away. And so there are a lot of things I wanted to ask you about the process. First is like, what gave you the idea to make this documentary? Like, did you know Omar personally? Were you just really a fan of jazz? Were you like friends? Yeah, just talk a little bit about the seed of the documentary.
I mean, the reason that I ended up starting making the film, and it overlapped with my father's Vietnam, which is my first feature. I started that in 2006, and it didn't come out till 2016. And I started the Omar thing in 2013, and it just came out on streaming services, although it had its world premiere in 2022.
Right.
And that was in Dallas, Texas, at the USA Film Festival, but we had a test screening at Clark, as you said, in 2022. Um, I was working for a a short-lived arts and culture publication called Tribe Magazine, for a really wonderful guy named Tony Aguilar, who, he basically was like, he had a budget to do like a free arts and culture like quarterly, and he wanted to do like really elevated, really good short journalism pieces, just on arts and culture, and with a pretty local like focus. But then there would be some more sort of far-flung stuff, and he had this collection of CDs. Some of them were CDRs, and some of them were like, real releases and stuff like that. But he gave me a stack of CDs and said, "Hey, why don't you go through these? These are some CDs I really like. Like, maybe there's a story there, or maybe you do a review thing, or and you add what you think." And so I was listening to some of these CDs, and some of the artists I recognized, some of them I didn't. I would say, broadly, they were international music. There were music from people all over the world. Or certainly in Asia and Europe, North America, South America, there were Africa, there were far flung like different kinds of recordings. And so one of them was Omar Sosa, and I'm embarrassed that I don't even remember which record it was. I mean, it's been so long. That was again, that was like 15 years ago, 2010 or something like that, where that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. For whatever reason, the record spoke to me. I was like, oh, this is interesting. It doesn't sound like something I've heard before. It doesn't sound like Latin music that am familiar with, which I'm not that familiar with Latin music at that point. And I think when people think about Latin music, growing up in central Connecticut, like it was like the Spanish language radio station in Hartford, and like I didn't respond to that. I didn't know what, music that was. And it was like, in the 80s when I was growing up. And if we stumbled on that radio station, it just sounded silly. Like, and then the instrumentation was sort of silly. And I wasn't into dancing. And I was like, this is not really my thing. And then like I get a little older, and I was aware at Berklee College of Music, I was aware of Irakere. A friend of mine, Zach Borove, turned me on to Irakere when I was at Berklee. And I, again, wasn't really my thing. I mean, I was like, this is amazing. Like I knew the instrument, I knew that the musicianship was like through the roof, and it was like really fun to listen to. Um, and then the Buena Vista Social Club documentary that came out years ago, that was, seismic event as far as music documentaries are concerned, and people were like clamoring to get into Cuban music, and like, kind of older Cuban artists, like elderly Cuban artists, were kind of getting their flowers. They were really getting their due at that point. And I remember people. I mean, I was even joking with my friends where I was like, this movie invented Cuban music to most people. Like, people had no idea that Cuba was had music until this film came out. I mean, it was ridiculous, like how big the profile of that film was. So but that's the limit. I mean, really the limit. Like Santana, like I'm talking like my Latin music experience was pretty like American based, and like I had a very kind of like white American lens on it, and it was just another thing that I was like, oh, that's a dense musical culture that like I wouldn't even know where to start if I was going to learn about it or something. And
Right.
so for whatever reason, when I fast forward to 2010, for whatever reason, when I listened to this Omar record, I was like, oh, this is cool. Like I really like this. And I found myself going back to it. And then I was like looking into his other stuff, and just kind of like learning a little bit about him. And then I sort of I know that like on his CDs, I have a stack of them here somewhere. On his CDs, there's like a PO box and a phone. I think there's even a phone number and email address for his label, OTA Records, which is founded by Scott Price for the who's still Omar's manager to this day. Was founded in 1995 for the purpose of putting Omar's music out. I think I called Scott or I emailed Scott and was able to get Scott to hook me up with Omar for a Skype interview. For Tribe magazine, and ended up just transcribing it. It's like a Q&A like they do in Rolling Stone or any kind of
Right.
magazine, where it's just like we had this long conversation, and I was like, I don't really need, I'm not gonna write like a narrativized version of this. Like, I'm just gonna like do a Q&A, be like, we had this great conversation and I'll just transcribe it. So it was an easy story to write, and the conversation was like, I don't know, we spoke for like 45 minutes or 50 minutes. I mean, it's still, you can find it online. It's sort of interesting, like as a relic now, because we spent so much time together since then. But um and then Tony and I, who's the editor in chief of Tribe Magazine, went to see Omar perform in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia at University of Pennsylvania. I'm pretty sure at UPenn, and he was playing with a quartet, I think, a quartet or a quintet, and Jerry Gonzalez was also playing, who's another kind of famous Latin musician and composer, and they even performed together a little bit at the show. So I mean, I was really psyched and was bowled over, and I like Philadelphia. It was a cool venue, and I got to meet Omar and take a picture, after the show, which was cool. And that photo ended up going into the issue of the magazine with the conversation, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, there were things about his story that I found to be really particularly fascinating. Like one of them was when I was talking to him in 2010 or 2011, whatever it was. I remember his record with Paolo Fresu, who's a celebrated jazz trumpeter who lives who's Italian. He lives in Sardinia, or from Sardinia. Um, and Paolo's huge. I mean, Paolo is like, I mean, jazz is way bigger in Europe than it is in the States at this point. Like Paolo will play like amphitheaters, like solo trumpet. Like he's just like this kind of massive
Oh,
talent,
wow.
and people love him. But Omar and he, and this is in the film. Omar and he kind of hooked up years ago, and they started the recording together, and they've made 3 records, I think, since then. And Alma is the first one, ALMA, Alma. And that was the one he was promoting when I spoke to him. And so I had an advanced copy of Alma, or it had just come out. Um, and they cover a song by Paul Simon on it called Under African Skies, which is on Graceland, Graceland is like this massive record from when I was younger. Everybody's boomer like parent had it. Everybody. I mean, no, you could not walk into a house in my town and not hear that record playing at some point, or a CD playing at some point. Like it was huge. Like it was, again, a seismic kind of cultural thing in ways that we don't really have anymore. Everybody's sort of siloed off into I like Taylor Swift, or I like this, or I like that. This was like everybody liked this record. Like you couldn't escape it.
Mm.
And I talked to Omar about that, and I was just like, well, so when you guys covered Under African Skies, like of all things, like did you bring that to the table? Did Paolo bring that to the table? Like, do you like that record? Like, did you hear that record when it came out? And he was like, I've never listened to that record. I still have never listened to that record. And when I was in Cuba when it came out in the mid to late 80s, whenever it was exactly, in 89 or 88 or something like that, I've never heard it. I had no idea it existed. So he's like, as he would say, when he would tell stories like that, I was like, oh, this is interesting, because like this guy has this international career and this international sound. I don't really like the term world music, but people use it. He has this like internationally kind of inflected or influenced sound, and works in these different like quote unquote files of activity, where he's like collaborating with this person or that person, and the bass player's from Mozambique, and this guy's from this place, and so he's got collaborators from all over the place, and yet he has these like musical, like what you consider to be like these big kind of like swaths of like popular culture that he never experienced, and pop music that he never, even jazz that he never really experienced when he was in his formative years, like when I was at Berkeley and I could
Mm.
listen to anything I want. Even then there was no streaming, but still I felt like I could listen to whatever I wanted to. I didn't feel like anything was forbidden. And when
Right.
he was in college, he wasn't really supposed to be listening. He was supposed to be studying classical music. People imagine that he was studying folkloric music, or he was studying tumbao, or he was studying Latin music. There's no, he wasn't studying Latin music. Like that's a thing that I could have done at Berkeley, and people were doing at Berkeley. People, learning about Latin music. And again, Latin music is just overly broad for term anyway. But like Omar was literally
Itself,
like
yeah.
learning from Russian, instructors, and being taught the classical music canon. And he was a percussionist. But when he started to experience jazz, when he started to experience this other music, it kind of got on top of him. Like he couldn't really shake this, like this kind of, he refers to it as fusion, which is like what it was called back then. Weather Report, and sort of, jazz rock, or what's referred to derisively as like musician rock or yacht rock sometimes too. Like he got all that stuff kind of seeped in, and I think he was like, well, I really like this kind of virtuosic and really technical stuff, and I like composing. He had a knack for writing. He still writes longhand. He reads really well, music. And but he also likes a good melody. He likes something to be catchy, like something to have a rhythm that you can tap your foot to. And so those things where you might see paradox there, or that they're hard to integrate, he does it seemingly effortlessly. Like those are things like he'll write a composition that's sort of like maybe sounds simple on a solo piano, but then there could be a complicated arrangement of it. I guess any
Right.
composition could be that, but yeah. So again, I forgot what your question was, but uh yeah, it's just like a hard, it was like one of those things where I was like, okay, well, I know what I find compelling about this story, and as long as I keep my humility about this, and I'm not being like, oh, well, I'm a white person and I'm gonna fucking explain, Cuban music to other people. Like that wasn't at all what it was.
No.
Like I don't know shit about this, and I want Omar to like tell me about it. And so Omar being like, I want Omar to be represented in the film much more than I want my story, or my own point of view to be in there, or something like that. I understand that it's there. You can't shake that. But like, what, as long as he's happy, like I'm happy. Like I haven't had any angry audience members about it at all. Nobody's like, hey, you got this thing wrong. So
Right. Like I just can't, I mean, yeah, I just can't see like what you said, like, hey, I got this thing wrong. Like going back to the point of view, it's so clear, and it's so like not even that it's like, oh, as a filmmaker, like because you don't come from this culture, you should take a step back. But I think it's more like they had themselves such compelling stories to tell. And I think
yeah.
that you illuminated that in such cool ways. Like archival footage, animation, like multimedia. I want you to talk a little bit about that, like the process of sourcing all the archival footage. Like, how did you find it? Did you like tell Omar to go into his like personal archives? Like, was it just the people you interviewed had this footage? Like,
I don't even think he
talk
has
a little bit.
anything in his archives. Like his manager luckily does. So like, but Omar is very funny. Like he doesn't really talk about the past very often, and so it was like that, those were things I had to like get him to talk about in
Mm,
interviews, obviously. And there was even, I mean, I had spoken to him at length twice before he really like opened up about like really hard situations that he had, or really scary situations that he had, or challenging situations that he had, things like that. Because he is pretty in interviews with the press. I mean, I've seen it. I've done lots of interviews with him. We just did one this week actually for a podcast, a radio show actually, and somebody's going to write
dope.
an article. But
That's awesome.
he's like just relentlessly positive. Like he doesn't really like, he doesn't complain a lot. Like and again, I'm working with him is different than doing press with him, obviously. But like when we spoke, the it became kind of obvious that there were like certain stories that were so good that there was no way they weren't gonna get cut out. Like the thing about the Guitar Center audition, writing the jingles where the guy just wanted the word salsa in it. Like he just launched into that. Like I didn't know anything about. I was like, were you making good money when you moved to Ecuador? Like, but he was like, well, that because I wrote commercial jingles. Like I didn't know that. I didn't do any pre-interviews with him or any research about that. And there's nothing out there to get. I mean, it's like none of that stuff is like around. Like he doesn't have recordings of that stuff. So I kind of invented it, in the film. But so he but Scott sent me a box, and I think I have a picture of it somewhere. But Scott sent me two boxes of like tapes and CDs and DVDs and mini this and stuff that doesn't exist anymore, mini DV and mini discs, and
Mhm.
like all kinds of weird like tapes, like and stuff, and VHS and all kinds of stuff, and just this box of stuff, and some of it was labeled, some of it wasn't. And then we got some stuff from Cuba, and then we got some stuff
Wow.
from I think from South America, that was like when he was playing in a band that was based in Ecuador. And so there was just a lot of stuff, and people were like, "Here, use this. Like, this is just use this, use this." Everyone was really generous about it. I mean, it's not it's again, nobody's getting rich off of this. Like it's not like I'm making a film about, Taylor Swift again, not to use her again, but like, it's
You're
like
just dragging her through the mud here.
no, no, not at all.
No, I'm kidding.
I,
I'm
I
kidding.
love Taylor Swift. How dare you?
I don't listen to her. I'm
Oh, I
just
know.
joking.
I
Yeah.
just I just mean I just mean like she's so famous that like everything's like really controlled. Like if I wanted to do a piece about Taylor Swift, it would be like you'd have to go through like levels of security and stuff. Like and
That's
I
fair.
think like so doing something like this, like the management, is like Scott is just like this is great. Like people have talked about doing this before and nobody's ever really done it. And I didn't tell him it was going to take me 12 years, but I didn't know, and so I just kind of went blindly in the direction of trying to complete this thing. But like, when you get that much material and you don't really have anybody working for you, you just kind of go through piece by piece and you're just shuttling through and trying to find moments that might be compelling and pulling selects out of it and getting it transferred and into something I can use, which I had to do a lot of kind of on my own, or I had somebody at Rhode Island PBS helping me, my friend
Oh wow.
Mike Riley. There's a guy, Gary Halquist, who lives in really close to me that does it. There's a company called Primetime Video, I think it's called, that he has every kind of machine you can imagine, like every deck you can imagine, like for every kind of piece of media. So he transferred a lot of it.
Wow.
But so that was the archival material stuff, and so I used a lot of that, obviously. The animation was like I knew it was going to be costly and time consuming, but there was also like a real lack of pictures of him. Like I didn't have a lot of pictures of him in like high school, or like I didn't have any pictures of him in Angola, like I didn't, or in Ecuador even. Like so there wasn't a lot of material to go on with that. Like there's very few people that have images of him before he was famous, basically. So it's like I had all of the things I could find, but like yeah, I needed to fill in those blanks. So like that, that the jingle writing thing, or the war, the Angolan Civil War, or the Guitar Center thing when he first moves to San Francisco. I wanted that to have a kind of a more immersive quality to it. And I don't know, my sister's huge into anime, and I'm always watching anime with her. She's turning me on to some series or a movie that I've never seen, and I love animation and documentaries. I mean, I think people don't realize how often they see it. This about it maybe passes them by. It's like 5 minutes out of a 100-minute movie, and then, but they're seeing motion graphics, they're seeing animation, and then they say, "Well, wow, you used animation." It's like, yeah, well, I mean, lots of people do. It's not like yeah. So
Did your sister animate those little
no, no,
segments?
no.
Oh, okay.
My sister's a scientist, so
Oh,
she's just a fan. Like so she just is like well versed in it, and she's been into anime since we were young. I mean, so I think for me it was like the dual thing of like seeing it in documentaries, like Beware of Mr. Baker, which is about Ginger Baker. That has some great animation in it. Between that and like being a fan and like
right.
liking animated stuff that's for grown-ups, I don't want to watch Moana ever again, as you know. But like
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. How old are your kids? Like, if they're
well,
under the age of 10, then
no, you know what? Yeah, 12 and 8, and the 8-year-old still absolutely loves it. So that Moana could pop back up at any second. I shouldn't even say it too loud, or
you're God's bravest soldier dealing with that.
so so uh so yeah, and it's no shade on. I'm just not much of a. I'm not an adult Disney fan. Put it that way.
That's a green flag.
That's fine. That's a green flag. It's all right.
Um,
I'm cool with Inside Out. There's some of the stuff I'm okay with, but some of the stuff I'm a little sick of. But yeah. So I think it just needed to be visually represented. It needed to be fun. It needed to be humorous. And with the Angola sequence, it needed to feel real. It needed to feel kind of immersive, and but it's so expensive, and I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I wasn't, now I know a little bit better. I mean, D Boyd, who co-owns the animation company Floating Pear, who did the animation, and they're based in Pawtucket. And
mm,
she actually just sent me a nice note saying congratulations for the streaming on Amazon and stuff. But they're both D Boyd and Damon Wong are just fabulously talented and do wonderful work. But I wish I had twice as much money and twice as much time and all this.
isn't that what every filmmaker says? Like after a project, yeah. Well, I mean, I loved it was like a nice surprise, and like now that you say that, like you like that you one often watches a documentary, don't realize there's animation to it. I think that if it can like flow seamlessly, like that's a testament to you. Um, and like in addition to that, I kept kind of like coming back to the animation is kind of sort of like an anchor, but like now that you're saying that, like there it was kind of like a proxy for when Omar was younger. Like I think that that's super cool. I wanted to ask, were there like so many anecdotes like about Omar's life stand out to me. Like honestly, he seems like a really interesting guy. Like even just to have like a 30-minute like cup of coffee with him, I feel like that would be like an overflowing conversation. What you said about the salsa, like him being a writing jingles really stood out to me. But then also that little anecdote of how when you were saying he was studying classical music, they weren't really allowed to listen to anything other than that, and they kind of found that little radio, and they were all kind of like they. When he said they put the mattresses together, like that, they're just like so vivid, and I just loved moments like that.
Well, it's cool to think about somebody like huddling around a radio and like just like getting some culture that they're not used to or
Right.
something, right? It's like it just seems so quaint and stuff. And he's not even that old. I mean, he's born
No.
10 years before me, so I don't feel like he's that old, but it's like it really feels so ancient, like this idea that they're like huddled around a radio. Like it just seems,
Right.
and he's alive now in the age of streaming, and it's like he's crossed this border like where it's
For
like there's
sure.
literally like zero internet. Me too. I didn't have an email address in college. Like, so it's just so the things that we grew up with and certainly that he grew up with seem so just antiquated, and they are. I mean, but it's just a great visual. I mean, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
An amazing visual. Were there any other like anecdotes that you like kind of thought would become cool visuals but that couldn't make the cut, or like any other stories you have about him?
He also served in Nicaragua. He
Wow.
served, when he was in the military, he wasn't just in Angola, and in fact, he was in. Oh my God, there's a third location now. For some reason, I'm not thinking about it. But he was in three different countries. I think two in Africa and then Nicaragua. But I can't really remember, so don't quote me on that. I mean, there would have been other episodes. I mean, especially the way he talked about the way that some of the imagery would then kind of like influence his music, or even just names of his compositions, and thinking about water, or thinking about elements, and using them in his music. Like Gustavo Avallez, who's his a longtime collaborator, a percussionist that plays in different configurations with him, duo, and with Sekou Keita and the Transparent Water, and Suba trios, or trio. That's the same three guys. Gustavo will bring like a water, like a tub of water, and he'll play percussion on the top of the water. So he's
Uh,
slapping the water as if he's slapping a drum, but it's like rather than having a tight drum skin, it's this loose material that's a particle system of water, basically, right? So
right.
and it's amazing to hear. And he uses water, like samples of water in his music and things like that. So yeah, if I had it to do over again, I think that there would be a more like the animation, like the animation budget would have exploded. I mean, I would have had more visual stuff, I think, than I had. But there's a ton of archival material, as you said, and there's a ton of music to be heard. And I also am not a person that I'm not a filmmaker that like, or an audience member that like has a problem with seeing talking head interviews. I mean, there's this kind of like idea that like well, I mean, I talk to my students about this all the time. You set up the interview, and you take the longest to set it up, and then when you're editing, you want to get off of it as soon as possible. You just like you find yourself getting bored by like looking at a person talking. Like that doesn't happen to me. Like I actually don't mind watching an interview or listening to a pod, whatever it is. Like
Right.
I like those conversations. So I don't mind that. I mean, these are like dynamic kind of cool people. Like, I mean, just Omar's glasses and his how he dresses his hair, like all that
Yeah.
stuff. Like I mean, it's hard to look cool next to that guy. It's impossible for me.
So
So like we're standing next to each other, and I just look like a goon, and he's like this, he's these like flowing robes, and he's all cool, and everybody people might not know who he is, but they know he's somebody famous. Like when he walks in,
yeah,
they're kind of like, who
for
the hell is
sure.
that guy?
He just has that air about him, and I felt with every cut I was noticing like a little like specificity or something like cool about him, like you're saying, his style, his hair, his like facial hair, just like you could tell he's lived a very storied life.
He has a good sense of style. He knows how to dress. Obviously, he has a sense of stagecraft too. So there's something kind of about him when he's on stage. But also he really like we talked about this on Monday when we recorded this other interview. Like we both really like food and wine a lot too. So there are some really regular things about him too,
Oh,
which
for sure.
Oh, I really want to try this sushi place or what, so he's also just like he can also be very plain spoken and very humble. And so there is a persona thing there, which is cool, but also like hanging out with him is really fun. Like he's a warm person. He asks about you. He wants to see you're okay. Like where have you been? What have you been doing? And so he's like, yeah, in a way, like he's not I mean, no jazz artist is that famous at this point, but he's not so famous that it's like, he's a jerk to everybody,
Right. He's
So
still very
yeah,
seems like down to earth,
yeah,
very.
yeah, pretty
Um,
down to earth. I mean, but if you talk to him about, ancestors, and or you talk to him about religion, or if you talk to him about, improvising, or his mind when he comes on stage and things like that, like, he'll go into places that are like, wow, that's really incredible. Like, and that's real. That's a thing I probably might never experience, but I get to be near him and kind of talk to him about it and feel that from him. Yeah, but he's a good hang. All these people are good hangs, so it's like it's easy. Like Gustavo or Sekou or even the journalists that are in the film are like, John Schaefer or Ned Sublett, Ted Pankin. Like these guys are like really knowledgeable and they're like pretty charismatic. Like
oh, for
it's
sure. You
crazy.
could tell. I wanted to ask you about the title cards as well, because that seemed to incorporate some type of like religious, like spiritual aspect that I thought was really interesting that I didn't also honestly did not expect from you as a filmmaker. So I was wondering like what the because you don't really bring up spirituality, like at least from what I've like in the time I've known you. So I wanted to ask you about that. Like, what was the significance of like having the spiritual ties? I'm trying to think of the. I can't remember. Was it Alegua or like was that the name of the god? Okay, yeah. Can you talk about that? Like the significance of using that as kind of like a tie-in throughout the documentary.
Yeah, there were three different kind of scenarios. The one time, I mean, and Omar, we laugh about this now because it's so long ago. But I think it was in 2017, and I think he was in Boston, and we had a meeting, and he was performing with Sekou Keita, the Senegalese kora player, and Gustavo on percussion, and they were playing at Berkeley Performance Center, I believe. And I couldn't attend the concert, but I went up and met him. But I had Jay Rossi and my friend Dave Del Pollo that we're all friends. They filmed some of the sound check and stuff, so that's in the film. But for some reason they wouldn't let us shoot the concert, which is weird since I'm an
Ah,
alumni. It's like,
that sucks.
I know, whatever, it's fine. I was like, "Ugh," like it's whatever. So it totally sucks. You're right. So into that, I went up either the night before, I think it was the night before the concert, or the day before or day after, whatever it was, and my friend Mark Colucci is a director at Sweet Ricky, the production company in Boston, and he let us into the office there and hung out with us while I showed Omar and Scott a lot of the film that I had already cut together. And again, mind you, this is now 8 years ago, right? So at that point, even so, we went out and we had too much to drink. Me and Omar and Scott and Mark actually, and at least I'll say I had too much to drink, but say that. But we that was maybe the only time that we ever got in a face-to-face argument, Omar and I, kind of about something about the film, which was like, this is taking too long. Like, when's this going to be out? It's like literally eight
The
years ago.
classic
I'm like,
conversation. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
yeah, and I think that like we're a very odd couple, like in some ways. In some ways we have a lot in common. In other ways, like we're an odd couple, and he's very prolific. He works constantly. I am not very prolific, and I don't work constantly. So I think like me taking the time that I took was like beginning to be like, well, what are we doing here? And I sort of was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, but I just had a film come out. I'm gonna finish this,
Right.
but you gotta give me some time. We have to figure something out here. And I think the scenarios were, at that point, I would go to Cuba with him. He hadn't performed in Cuba in decades at that point, or it's been a really long time, and I don't even know how many times he has since 2017. Very very few. People have this idea of Cuban artists that, or at least again, I say people. I had this idea that maybe a Cuban artist would have this like they defected, right, or they escaped, and then they have this magical kind of like, oh, I wish I could go back there, but it's not really as magical as all that. I mean, there's a sort of thing about where you're from and where your ancestors are from and how your ancestors ended up there, that is a very strong and palpable in his music and the way he speaks about his music. But he wasn't like overly like he wasn't like clamoring to go back there and do like a here's where I was born and here's where I grew up and here's what
Yeah.
and both of his parents had passed at that point, or his mom was in bad shape and his dad had passed away years ago, and so it wasn't like going back and doing like a family thing. So there was that scenario. We were like, okay, we could go to Cuba and do like a shoot where that would be the backbone of the film. Like we would kind of an A-B story. We'd do the past and then we'll do the present kind of thing. And
Yeah.
then another scenario, which I really loved, was to go to his home in Menorca, which is this beautiful island, and so I was gonna like go on vacation with him for a week and like just film him relaxing, just swimming and like maybe composing, maybe hanging out with his family, eating, just regular guy stuff, right? And just kind of have that be the B story, where it's like, okay, the past, a little bit of his present, his trajectory as a solo artist, and then also kind of like his home life. So that was one, and then the other one that sort of mirrored that was maybe I'll just go to Barcelona, where he was living at the time, and spend some time with his family, like a day or two, like literally just like a day at home and just kind of hang out, whatever. So for whatever reason, all three of those things were just not possible. Even where we were like gonna book travel to Spain at one point, it was like maybe not, and maybe this isn't the best time, and maybe something came up where it wasn't gonna happen, which is fine. But we really had all of these pieces in 2017 kind of like ready to go. Like we had the kind of paper cut. We're like, okay, well, this is this, and this is that, and this is about Ernesto and Leandro, and this is about Sekou and Gustavo, and this is about this person, and this is about that person. Meanwhile, he's still making records the whole time. So like every year there's another new project that comes out that like, oh, it's like shit, should I touch on this one with Yelian Cañizares and like, oh, hey, do you want to interview Chucho Valdez? And I was like, yeah, of course I do. So all this stuff kind of still happened as it was going. But getting the idea to, I mean, I'll never forget. I mean, again, I have this stack of CDs here somewhere. I think it's Spirit of the Roots. One of his CDs, if you open up the CD, that story of Elegua is in there, kind of translated from I can't remember who wrote the original kind of text, but there's a Spanish version of it, an English version of it. I took the English version of it and I started to pull it apart. I edited it a little bit, and I started to use it as, like you said, just those title cards, those little interstitial text bits. And I was like, oh, this
Mhm.
kind of works. This works pretty well. And I'm not being too precious about like moving the narrative around, and I'm not saying he is a Legua. It's not as simple as that. But there's something cool about, rather than mirroring his story with another part of his own story, mirroring his story with like this kind of spiritual Santeria touchstone for him, which is Elegua, and which is Elegua as a child. Elegua is mischievous. Elegua opens and closes doors. Elegua is light and dark. Like all these kinds of this kind of poetic language, but it's also a way of an organizing principle for Omar when he's performing, when he's getting ready to go out and play. When he just it's just kind of like it's a talisman. It's like it's a symbol. It's not again, I think religion, obviously, religion, we've talked about this before, in your own, religion's really powerful. And I think like to whether I'm an atheist or I'm an agnostic, or I'm just not really all that interested in that, for myself, there's no denying the power of it in other people's lives.
For sure.
And I think that to shut that out, or to not pay some attention to that in the film would have been a problem, or the film really benefits from having it in there, I think. And it turned out it cost nothing to do. It was just like, we're going to add this little narrative and glue our bigger film to it, essentially, and let it hold it up, essentially. So it's a structural principle. It's an element of form that I never really expected to do. But it really helped in the end.
For sure. Really like, I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear that you say that you didn't necessarily like, I don't know, give like a ton of forethought to it. I mean, I specifically think that it, it was enlightening, and it the film is already robust, but I feel like it made it all the more robust, specifically in terms of culture from like Latin American, like Afro Latina culture. That like I'm delving my foot back into not necessarily practicing religion, but exploring that more. And I'd recently watched a documentary about Yoruba culture, and they interviewed different musicians, and like a lot of them like talked about religion and the role like that played in one's life. Specifically, I thought it was interesting with this film because there was, going back to anecdotes, I just love there's so many anecdotes in this film I love, but Omar had talked about one time, correct me if I'm wrong, he said that his mother or grandmother had maybe like gotten this premonition that he would become a musician. I'm not sure if you can like elaborate on that or if I'm misremembering
I don't
something.
think that's something Omar's talked about in interviews. I don't think that's in the film.
Okay.
I can't remember if it was an uncle. It was a yeah, somebody had a dream, right? It was like yeah,
Right.
that's another one that I sort of wished was in the film. That would have been a nice animated sequence. But
Right.
he's talked about that in interviews with me, and I can't remember exactly the story. But that yeah, that there's this kind of that there was he's very concerned, or he concerns himself with ancestry and kind of like that I think he's consumed, or he's very present with the idea that we're only that life is ephemeral, right? That our physical kind of that our bodies and the time that we have is short. I think he also views his life on a continuum of other people's lives as well, and that's why he talks about Miles Davis, and he talks about ancestors, not just being people in their family, but also like people that influenced them or do the same, did something that they looked up to, or did something that sent them on a trajectory. And I think he's deeply respectful of the past, and it doesn't have to be the deep past. It can be the very recent past, and including like the passing of his friend, or the passing of these musical giants, as this always happens, as it goes, and people who are big influences on him and stuff. But yeah, I don't like it was a it's yeah it was like necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you
Yeah.
think about this thing, it's like, oh, it's so profound or whatever, and I was like, I just needed something to glue these pieces to, and then it's like, wow, it is really it's really deep, like what's happening here, like, and I think sometimes you don't, and you have to kind of trust your own taste too. Like I think it can be tacky, or it can be exploitative, or it can be but it's not. I really felt like, oh, this works really well. Like this is where the film's opening, and now I get to like have this tributary in the film, or this kind of vein in the film running through for the entire film, where somebody's not just like, oh, why did he mention that at the beginning? Like why you're not coming back to that, or you're not paying
Right.
that off, rather than have it be really kind of throughout. So yeah, it was great. I mean, it was a really nice and totally inexpensive and like accidental way to kind of like glue the film together, I think. And it was really, really nice. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Just to beginning to wrap up a little bit here, I kind of have a two-pronged question for you. I like to ask like everyone I interview for this podcast, like what their goal as like an artist, specifically filmmaker, is like when they envision like an audience doing their work, what they want them to take away from that. But I kind of have like an addendum that for you. I specifically wanted to know like what life form, or like what do you want, not necessarily like the afterlife, or but like the I guess the afterlife of this film to be, like, do producing this independently. I mean, that's like a whole other ball game. And yeah, I just want to know, like, what I mean. Where do you want the film to go? Like, or do you plan to like teach the film in your class? Like, because I think that would be cool.
It's funny, like as much as self-promotion as I do on social media, I don't really talk about it with my students very often, and they're kind of like, "What is he talking?" I say like the hard thing, assuming that they know what it is, and I'm like, I'm not friends with them on social media, so it's sometimes
Right.
very or rarely, so I have to kind of be like, "Oh, well, a film of mine just came out, and it's not," and they're like, "Oh, that's great," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, sort of." I mean, it's been
Because,
12
because
years.
okay, like
Yeah,
real talk, like it's so rare for me that I have an instructor, an educator who is also doing the art. And so that's something I really value and I really respect, because as somebody who like wants to transfer into some sort of career, like, I don't necessarily want to like, be making big budget movies and having that be paying my bills.
yeah,
Like, I still intend to have a day job and maybe like, continue to have life experiences that lend to me making interesting movies.
yeah, yeah,
But, there is like, I did go to college for this and I studied this, and I want to be able to turn it into some like art. Like, I want to make feature length movies, whether or
yeah,
not they're
yeah, yeah.
documentaries, XYZ. So I kind of want to, I'm asking you this question to be what is the path that you forge, slash, like, what do you want the afterlife of this film to be? Because although it is something that you do have to market, it is still a piece of art. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I want to pick your brain about that.
I mean, I really want it to be available forever and ever, everywhere you could possibly imagine. I worry about streamers. I worry about the Amazons, the Netflixes, the Maxes, the Apple TVs of the world. I worry about link rot, which is like a thing, which is like, you think something's permanent on the internet and then it just disappears and you're sort of, wait, what? I was watching that. Um, so I think that like having it on a Blu-ray and having it like on, having people having it in their homes and giving it to their friends or whatever it is would be great. I mean, every time I talk to Omar, he says something like, we've got to go show this in Italy, and like we got to go to Japan and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, like if you organize it and give me, a couple hundred
All the
bucks, like
money.
I'll be there. Yeah, like I
Uh,
don't, as long as I can be flown there and be fed when I'm there and clothed and sheltered, like yeah,
yeah,
I'll go
yeah,
anywhere you want, man. And so because I think he likes talking about it, I think we have a good rapport. We've been doing kind of public events together since 2022 with it. And there've been a few of those, but many Zoom calls and many kind of like interviews and conversations with journalists and stuff like that. So, I would love to travel with it. I would love to have it translated into as many languages as possible. I already have German, Italian, Spanish,
wow,
French. Yeah, so those are all kind of available and hopefully going to help with foreign sales when my distributor Indie Rights is going to take it to the Cannes marketplace with the rest of their slate. Who knows what's going to happen with it, but like it would be nice for it to be readily available in the countries where this music is more popular overseas. I mean, people like to
for
think of
sure.
jazz as this American art form, or salsa even as an American art, which it sort of is, but like it's way more popular, and his influence and like his persona and the venues that he plays in Europe are just astounding. Like the scene at the end where he's playing Jazz at Vienne, like that amphitheater there is just incredible, and it's
Crazy.
thousands. There's like way bigger crowds than he plays for in the States, and it's like, so it would be cool to have that available in, Germany, Austria, France, Italy, everywhere. It's Portugal, Spain, like every country you can name in Europe and Africa and South America. Like I'm there's like anywhere I can get it would be great. And it's not, again, I'm not going to get rich. It's going to cost me time and money probably to get them in those markets. But I really just want it to be available to people because I'm pretty proud of it. And like, and people seem to like it. I don't get a lot of, like I said,
I
I don't get a lot
love
of
it.
complaints. Thank you.
No,
Uh,
I mean, do you kind of like envision maybe like a resurgence in like the appreciation of music and like people in my generation? Because I feel like this kind of like tapped me back into my love of music, especially
mm.
like music, like non-Western music. I feel like I see that happening with this film because it's so
If people get into Omar and his collaborators with it, that's great. I mean, if it's an entry point into like, well, where do I start with this guy? I mean, that's why we made the soundtrack. So the soundtrack's available on vinyl, on transparent red vinyl, and then white vinyl now. And it's also streaming. So Omar Sosa's 88 Well-Tuned Drums, there's like a soundtrack recording, which is just 8 songs that I chose and Scott approved basically. And Scott and I co-produced the record, but it was like these were songs throughout his career. There's only 8 of them, and it's just we felt like it was a pretty good representation of his music. It's a good, primer for somebody that doesn't know any of his music. And that's what I hope the movie does too. It's kind of like, oh well, I have experience with this, or I know that song, or I've heard of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, which is like one of the most famous jazz records of all time. Um, I'm hopefully providing like a trail of breadcrumbs to lead people into it, or giving somebody like a pretty easy roadmap to kind of check this music out. Because as Paolo says at the end of the film, he says something like this is music for everybody. Like it's not exclusive, it's not a club. Like
oh,
this is like music you can dance to, you can sit to, you can listen to with headphones, you can put it on while you're washing your car, whatever. It's like there's a lot of different like ways to listen to this music, and I think people would benefit from hearing it and getting into it. As far as my own career, my own goals for my career, or like my life, like I mean right now it's I'm living it. I mean, I don't really have like a lot of complaints about like work or family, or being creative and things like that. I work so small that I don't like the next project that I'm thinking about starting to do. Like I'm just gonna start shoot. Like Jay and I are just gonna start shooting. I mean, neither of us we don't make any money. Like I could spin my wheels like writing grants and stuff like that, or I could just like get in the car and drive to Maryland and like shoot an interview. You know what I mean? Like
right.
I'm lucky. I mean, I know that's a position of privilege to say like I can do that because I've got summers off and I've got a salary job and I've got insurance and I've got a supportive
Mhm.
spouse. My kids,
Oh, for sure.
who are going to be okay if I leave in a little while. But so I just um Yeah, I think like people put obstacles, students do this all the time. They put obstacles in front of themselves about like starting projects where it's like, well, you could just start doing it. You could just like make a 4 minute film. Like too many students are like, oh, I'm gonna make a feature, I'm gonna make a 45 minute, and I'm just like, dude, make an 8 minute movie. Like
Yeah.
yeah, at least take a weekend and make something. Make something with one location and two characters. Like really challenge yourself to paint inside a picture frame, and you'll be amazed what comes out, I think.
That's such a good note to end on. So